So we don't have time for all the warm-up questions I have, but we're going to start off with one. The name of the panel, right, was the path to enlightenment. Why is that? A few years ago, I had the opportunity to get a call from some friends who were running research at OpenAI. And they said, Anj, we've trained a little model called GPT-3, and we'd like to leave and start a little startup called Anthropic. And so I had the chance to come on as an early investor and help them out. And when I got my hands on Claude 2, which was a checkpoint that was not public, I started coding with it, because that was the main goal, right? Make a great AI coding agent. And between Claude 2 and 3 and so on, I remember distinctly a moment where I was overwhelmed when I realized the capabilities of the model at coding. And I found it very difficult to structure my work on how, as a programmer and engineer, like, where do you start when you have this incredible, almost like a bazooka that can roll out any kind of software you want? And one of the things that's difficult to start getting to the plateau of enlightenment that these guys are all at, and many of you are probably at now, where you can start building useful systems, is you often have to come up with a personal system, a mental framework for how to wrestle that overwhelming feeling into productivity, right? So why don't we just start there? Because what I've found is we're so early in the space that everyone has their own tips and tricks and tools and techniques that they've converged on to harness the, no pun intended, the capabilities of these models as an individual software engineer or a developer, and then produce something useful for the world. And so if you guys could just roll back to the first few moments in time when, if you agree, first of all, let me present this as a hypothesis. Do you agree with this observation? And if not, first, if you agree with it, it'd be helpful to share how you wrestled with that. When was the first moment you were like, oh, okay, it's like a muscle. I need a muscle to focus these capabilities in a way that's productive. Shall we start there? Yeah?
Sounds great.
And feel free to challenge the assumption as well. Go ahead, Alex.
Let's see. So, I mean, there's definitely there's a releasing of control is kind of like a key aspect here, right? Like, we used to write every line, and then we sort of started auto-completing some portion of the lines, and then we started, having AI compose commits, and then entire PRs, and now entire bug fixes. And so, along the way, there's always like this desire to understand exactly what's going on and make sure that it's correct. But actually, the more important and more useful thing is to, find the system that can find the problems that you're actually trying to look for, so that you don't have to look for them. So, a good CI system, good deploy infrastructure, all this kind of stuff makes it so you can give up control in a safe way. And then you can kind of let these models rip. Yeah, that's my approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eval's also a huge part. Yeah.
And we don't need to go in order, but if you got one, Ryan, go ahead.
Haven't written a single eval in my life. Would love to keep it that way. I think it's pretty necessary to have a sort of firm belief of how you want to build this system in order to chase after it well, which we can do because there's an infinity of software available to us now.
And if you could share an example of such a belief system.
Yeah, so my belief is that the machine is as capable as I am, and I am a software engineer, I am an employee in a company sort of thing, so I want to be able to prompt the thing as lazily as you should be able to prompt me or any of the other principal engineers that I work with, right? And the scope of what such a person can achieve is quite large. So I have always tried to curate the environment around these things such that I can give increasingly ambiguous, increasingly poor, increasingly contradictory information in order to get good outcomes out of it. And that has kind of required treating code as this abundant and disposable construct that we can kind of observe how the agent goes over a horizon, learn what context it should have had or did not have or was confused by from the produced dense artifact at the end, a PR, a Word doc, whatever, learn what decisions it made that were bad, and then try and be creative to put things in its environment tools, tests, context, review agents, such that we steer it away from the bad choices it would have made in the previous version of the environment. Basically, the role of the humans in the system is to extract all of those hidden choices and provide them to the agent in sources that are amenable to in-context learning.
Yeah, that's the best way, right? It's our job is to help the agent to do their best work. Like, I was literally backstage and I was reading the PRs that my agents were landing while I was doing my talk, because by now I have such high confidence that should we call it loop setup, leads to code that works and is well tested. Like, when those tools first came out, they could do things, and like when they got it right, I got excited. But it was so hard, and now I revisit those older projects, and I see like just how good the agents have gotten, and we kind of moved up the ladder. Right now, I tell my agent to triage, to like maintain your own agents to do everything. And those agents have all the capabilities now to not just write the code, but also review the code, and then run the code, and then look at the output of the code, and then maybe has adversarial agents that like will further refine what comes out. And my job is basically to give those agents all those things and to push the agent to work harder. Like the average run for whatever prompt I give is now 5, 10, sometimes 20 hours, where it used to be like half an hour. And that's fine, because I just do more in parallel. But I know that at the end, the chances that it did what I wanted are much higher. That's why I'm so comfortable now in letting them do things and then just pushing them to the repo, because I spend so much time on thinking about the pipeline.
It's almost as if not all the choices that go into a job well done are consequential. And if they're not consequential, you almost don't care about them. And our job in empowering the agents is to figure out which mistakes are consequential and make them impossible.
Mikael, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would say at this point, my North Star is to deprecate prompting as much as possible. It was a necessary evil for as long as we started to use LLMs, but especially for the type of product we build, which is for non-technical users, prompting is the biggest foot gun that you can expose to them, because they don't know exactly how to specify what they want. So overall, I had this realization when I saw the first models that actually had some good RL training for coding. And this was back in the days of like early 2025. So the Sonnet 3.5, the GPT-5 family, and so forth. The moment we started to see them actually coding and debugging at the same time, then you extrapolate from that behavior and you see where we are today, and imagine where we're going to be like in 1 year from now. At this point, everything that Peter was saying is going to become not only for technical users, but I think for everyone.
I have several questions I want to follow up with each of you on, but we promised the audience that if they had questions, we'd prioritize them, and we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to start with one that I think is relevant to something you guys all said. I think this is from Amir. Curious for your thoughts about security given the Hugging Face incident, but more specifically, personal agents already do things for their users that the users did not expect or intend. Are you guys rethinking anything around architecture or harness? Now, let me try to simplify that question a little bit, because you talked about wanting to end prompting. Both of you talked about narrowing down the scope of what are the important decisions to oversee, and if maybe Pete, since you're at OpenAI, you can talk about the Hugging Face incident a little bit, and how does that change or update the heuristic for what those decisions are when they're emergent capabilities like the one that were exposed last week, during the incident?
I feel almost like I need my OpenAI hat now, because that's a lot of what I do here. How can we run agents that are always thinking, and where we also feel comfortable that they're doing the right thing? And in many ways, it's just like setting up another system where maybe you separate where the agent runs and where it can execute things. Maybe you have yet another agent that oversees the agent. There's so many levers how you can like put in more fine-grained control and like more oversight to build a system that if for whatever reason the agent would derail, it's immediately catched.
But isn't the tension that in this situation, it was what you don't know to oversee, right? Like, unless I'm misunderstanding. One of the problems with elicitation overhang and so on that you guys have all talked about today is it's what you don't know that you don't know that messes you up. Are there any tips and techniques or tricks that you guys have developed to decrease the likelihood that that happens? Or if you had something else to say, Ryan, you should feel free to add.
I just think that is kind of like a more systemic problem rather than like the individual point things. Obviously, I don't have any context around this. I haven't been exposed to it, but it's kind of my belief here that like security programs in organizations are these things that have historically relied on human process controls in order to achieve the bulk of their outcomes, and are comparatively underinvested in technical controls. And as helpful these assistants are, they do not necessarily conform to social norms. You can see this in how they accomplish their tasks in interesting ways, sort of thing. So, kind of how I talk about in a lot of my work, shifting enforcement further to the left, increasingly proliferating technical controls in these domains is kind of necessary.
Got it. Well, to wrap the panel, I think I'm going to ask each of you to answer one question, which is, if you were starting today for the first time, or when a new model checkpoint comes out, let's start with that. Let's say there's a new Codex release or a new cloud release. What is the first prompt that you guys use to try and figure out the capability frontier of that model, specifically when it comes to software engineering? And you can answer the question any way you want. If it's not a prompt, it could be assistant. What do you do to figure out what new superpowers you have when a new checkpoint comes out in the world of software and coding? In that
I don't know. I don't do anything like that. I just kind of assume that the model providers are sort of learning from all of the ways in which their models are being used, and then kind of distilling that down into some kind of generalized knowledge, which then works in all the different domains that they've been exposed to since the new release. So if you want to figure out what the new model is good at, just look at what there's 20 variants of in the last 3 months, because it'll be good at all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think the models are not the best at being self-aware of their own capabilities. So this is more what do I and my teammates do, which is to try and throw away every prior we have established around what the models can and cannot do, and start with your grandest ambition possible and see where it fails again. And you'll necessarily tree shake the tools and context you have and maybe rewrite or throw some of it away. But you have to start from grand ambition at every new snapshot.
Cool.
I use them for orchestration, and then I level up the number of parallel things the model has to juggle. And 64 sub-agents were not a thing that was possible, and which now is possible,
Okay, I have so many follow-up questions, but Mikhail, you should go.
I ship it in production.
You just YOLO. I don't know if everybody should do that, but that's one way to approach it. Cool.
What a mic drop at the end.
That's a great mic drop. Well, on that note, thank you so much, guys, and we're going to keep things moving. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.